That said, Bitcoin price is volatile. And, again, the argument I've heard is like everything that's going to be a lot more valuable in the future. Like if you look at the history, like companies like Apple, like Tesla's now, but let's look at companies that have now stabilized, right? Apple is a good example. It's like volatile in the beginning. And so the argument for Bitcoin is like, yeah, this is the early stages because it's going to be a lot more valuable. Right now it's volatile. And this is why you have to have these kinds of strategies to ride out the volatility. Of course, everything that goes to zero is also volatile. Like the early days are volatile. Do you see like this volatility as like a feature or a bug, or is this just like a way of life?
So Amazon is the one that I know the numbers on in terms of the early volatility. Every year since it has gone public, it's had a double-digit drawdown in that year. The average is over 30%, and one time it drew down over 95%. Sounds a lot like Bitcoin, right? Yeah. Like, oh wow, this is crazy. But it's one of the best performing stocks in the last 20 years, if not the best performing stock. And so volatility is not positive or negative. It's positive or negative compared to the position you're in. Mm-hmm. So if you're long and it's volatile to the upside, it's positive. If you're long holding something and it's volatile to the downside, you see it as a negative. It's all about perspective. With that said, another way that I look at this is every asset priced in Bitcoin is down significantly. So over the last 1, 3, 5 years, the dollar priced in Bitcoin has crashed 99%. Mm-hmm. If you denominate stocks, it's down like 80%, 85%. If you denominate gold, if you denominate bonds, if you just go down the line, real estate, etc., it's all down massively against Bitcoin. Now, you could argue that that's because Bitcoin is appreciating in US dollar terms, or you could actually argue that the world is repricing this asset. It's doing price discovery on this asset. And it's essentially comparing. It's saying, hey, Bitcoin versus this stock, or Bitcoin versus this ounce of gold, or Bitcoin versus, this dollar, which is more valuable? And it continues to move up in the rankings in terms of the value that the world ascribes to this. Some of that's based on Lindy effect. Just the longer it persists, the more likely it is to survive. Some of that's based on like the underlying fundamentals of how much computing power, the usage, transaction volume, things like that. But some of it also is that as more and more people wake up to the fact that it's a finite supply asset that has a place in the world and demand increases, people just naturally compete and ascribe more value to it. And so the volatility, I think, all comes back to like, what do you price your life in? For a majority of people, that's dollars. And so you look at the US dollar price, you get all this volatility. The beauty of this is that 60% that doesn't move, regardless of price upward or downward in movement, those people aren't looking at the day-to-day price. What they've basically said is, I've acquired X amount of Bitcoin, and I'm just going to hold it for years. Mm-hmm. And every time somebody's done that, right? If you bought Bitcoin at any point in the last 12 years and you held it till today, you are up in US dollar terms. Mm-hmm. Now, if we had this conversation 18 months ago, couldn't say that. So it's all about not only the acquisition price, if you will, it's also when are you looking at it? Right? Because there was a point in 2017, you could have said the same thing, but in 18, you couldn't. And so I tend to think a lot about humans are really, really bad at short-term decision-making because we're so emotional, especially when something has a price tied to it.
Yeah, so it's in terms of our the strategies and decision-making, we should be long-term and have like a regular, almost think like an algorithm that in that kind of way. So I think you've tweeted that you believe that Bitcoin has a chance of reaching 1 million. I don't know what it is currently. I think it's 60, which is incredible. I think I remember when it was at least in the double digits. I think I remember when it was in the single digits of $1. So the fact that it's crossed 50 is crazy. But you're even crazier, apparently, thinking that it can reach 1 million. So do you think it's possible for it to reach 1 million? Is there some kind of transformative effects that we have to see first? When might it reach 1 million? Like, what are the signs that we would look for? What's required for it to reach 1 million?
So let's just look at it from a macro perspective. Gold is a $10 trillion asset. And when you compare the technology of gold to the technology of Bitcoin, Bitcoin is superior in every single way. right? It's more portable, it's more divisible, it's more verifiable, it's more scarce on everything. And so some people would argue it's a 10x improvement. Some people argue it's a 100x improvement from a technology standpoint. And so we don't need Bitcoin to actually kind of capture the full 10x or 100x improvement from a market cap standpoint. If Bitcoin simply captures 2x the value, it'd be a $20 trillion market cap, which would put Bitcoin at about $1 million, right? So kind of just from a macro perspective, if you have a 10x or 100x improvement from a technology standpoint, and you directionally get some value capture in that direction, you're hitting around $1 million or more dollar price point.
Can I ask a quick question, which is, what's the current market cap for Bitcoin?
The current market cap's right around $1 trillion, just over $1 trillion.
And you're saying gold is 10 trillion. And sorry, where did you get the 20 trillion?
20 trillion would just be 2x gold's market cap.
Got it.
Right. So if it's a 10x technology improvement, let's just say it only captures 2x the market cap.
Got it.
Right. And so again, if it was to capture just gold's market cap, kind of the equivalent, puts you around $500,000. Right. So you can kind of see
there's Bitcoin. So if you capture the entirety of the gold market, then it would be value of a single Bitcoin. The price of a single Bitcoin would be $500,000. Okay. To reach $1 million, it would be double that. That's what the 20 trillion comes from.
Correct.
Got it.
So if you then say to yourself, okay, how does the pricing kind of cycles work, right? Or the boom and bust cycles? Gold is a very kind of linear type supply schedule, meaning that there is a certain amount of gold that comes out of the ground each year. The inter-year variation in that incoming supply is not much, right? Maybe there's an extra mining company that gets set up, or a couple of them, or maybe one goes out of business. But for the most part, the kind of inflationary increase to the supply of gold is pretty stagnant year over year. Bitcoin has a very unique feature, which every 4 years, there is a programmatic supply shock, meaning that in the beginning, 50 Bitcoin every 10 minutes was introduced into the supply. After 4 years of that happening every 10 minutes, it was cut in half. So on in a single moment, it went from 50 to now it was 25. 4 years, every 10 minutes, 25, got cut in half again to 12 and a half. And then recently in May 2020, got cut to 6.25. When you have an asset that is determined, the price, based on supply and demand, you normally have two inputs to the equation. What is the supply and what is the demand? In an asset like gold or a stock or anything else, we have to do our best guess at the supply, both the existing supply and the incoming supply, and we have to do our best guess at the demand. And we're actually pretty good at this a lot of times in terms of directionally saying it's going to go up or down, and here's kind of some price point milestones. Bitcoin's unique in that there's 100% verifiable proof of the existing supply, the total supply, and the incoming daily supply. So we know 100%. I can show you on the actual blockchain or in the code that there's 21 million Bitcoin. And that's all there will ever be. I can show you that there's 18.6 million, give or take, Bitcoin that actually are in circulation today, right? And I can go all the way back and show you every single transaction that's ever occurred since January through 2009. And then I can show you on a daily basis that 900 Bitcoin a day are coming into the circulating supply. And so when you have 100% confidence, because you can prove the supply side of this equation, you can hold it constant. I know with 100% accuracy the supply side. So now I've reduced the mathematical equation that I need to do to determine price movements to a 50% reduction. I only have to worry about demand. I don't have to worry about supply. Mm-hmm. And so when I look at demand, I can do all kinds of things. I can take the demand over the last 10 years and the growth and just extrapolate it out. I can increase it. I can decrease it, whatever. But what you find is that these supply shocks lead to significant price appreciation as the asset gets repriced because there's a supply shock to it. And so probably the best thing that I've done over the last couple of years was in 2019, I started to talk about the idea that we were going to have both a supply shock and a demand shock in 2021. Mm-hmm. Or I'm sorry, in 2020. I didn't know when this bull market that we were in was going to end. Nobody knows, right? It's impossible to time these things. But you could tell that we were kind of at late stages of a cycle. There was inverted yield curves. There was gyrations in the repo markets, a lot of CEOs leaving their jobs, all this kind of stuff. And all I said was at some point when the market turns over, the government's going to have to step in. We were addicted to stimulus. They're going to have to manipulate interest rates down, and they're going to have to print money. I had no clue that there was going to be a global pandemic, that they were going to have to step in such an aggressive way and move rates not down, but down to zero, and that they not only were going to print hundreds of billions, but they're going to print trillions of dollars. But the framework that I used to think about this was, when they do that, everyone is going to run to store of value assets. They're going to run to gold, they're going to run to Bitcoin, etc. And right as they do that, it appears at the same time there's going to be this supply shock. So you're going to get a supply shock and a demand shock that are both positive for the price. And I called it rocket fuel for Bitcoin. Well, it happened. And here we are. I now look forward and I say, okay, we are likely going to see $100,000 Bitcoin this year, right? At some point. I don't know when it happens, but we're moving in that direction.
So you think in 2021 we'll see 100,000?
That would be my most conservative view. I've said $100,000 since 2019, and people thought that was insane and crazy and all stuff. Now I'm the conservative guy in the room because I stick with the $100,000, and people are saying, multiples of that number. Yeah. So we'll see what happens. But I think that there's still a lot of room kind of to run from a US dollar price standpoint. What is on the horizon is in 2024, we will have another supply shock. And so that's what I think will carry us to the $1 million Bitcoin
from
price.
The 625 to whatever.
50% reduction.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so that's what I think will basically, when we get that next supply shock, that'll carry us up over a $1 million Bitcoin price, which, if historical examples persist, and again, sometimes it's hard to use historical examples to look at future events. But if that happens, we would see $1 million of Bitcoin by the end of 2026. After
that wave.
So 2024 basically is the supply shock, and within 18 to 24 months, you would see the kind of top of the next market.
Hopefully, without a coupling to to another pandemic.
Yes, we would like to do all of this without a public health crisis.
So that would take it to 20 trillion. You don't have to compare it to the dollar, essentially, in some sense, that the dollar could also lose value. I mean, there's a lot of kind of dynamics at play here. But like fundamentally, there's going to be a huge move in your prediction of value into Bitcoin. I mean, that's a fascinating world to think about. But I do have to kind of ask you about the whole space of technology there, because we're talking about the value of security. We're talking about the future, which Bitcoin will be at the center of. But from my perspective of thinking how like I and others can build technologies on top of this kind of decentralized world, I'm thinking about different technologies out there, different cryptocurrencies out there, Ethereum being one, but there's a lot of others. So I'd love to get your sort of ideas about some of these. But